Night shifters on Reddit, what's your scariest story? I work nights as a zookeeper. Sometimes we have to check on the gorillas in their indoor holding. You walk down a dark hallway, maybe 6 feet from their enclosure. All you have is a flashlight and it's sometime after midnight. Your goal is to check on each gorilla to make sure they are okay. The gorilla's goal is to scare the ever-loving shit out of you. It's a game for them to get you to scream. They love hiding behind walls, sneaking up on you, and then bellowing as loud as they can right next to you. It's a fun game for them. Haunted houses have nothing on gorilla jump scares. Can you please record this? Working in a restaurant at 2:30 a.m. some dude shows up and is just watching us through the front window. Seemed drunk at first, ignored him for a few minutes, turned back around and he had a huge ducking rock in his hands and lifts it above his head and slams it against the window, shattering the outside layer. He then looks directly at us and says, "I'm gonna kill all of you." We dialed the police immediately and armed ourselves with kitchen knives. He wandered back to his car and sped off. The cops got there maybe 8 minutes later, seemed like 30 at the time, and couldn't find the guy. We were robbed at gunpoint a few nights later. I just walked out and never went back. I posted this somewhere else, but this is my story. I was an emergency dispatcher for the police department in my city, working overnights, when a woman called in to say her depressed husband had gone missing. She said he sometimes liked to go to a local, 1800s era, cemetery and just be alone. We sent 2 officers out to look for him, and they saw the door to the mausoleum cracked open. When they went in, they made their way through the very dark underground rooms and finally one of their flashlights caught the image of a figure. They thought it was the man just standing there, but it turned out that he had hanged himself from one of the pipes overhead, and was dead. The ceiling was so low to the ground that his feet were still on the floor. The officers hightailed it out and called back to say they had found him. This was late October in Maine. Very spooky. Was working really late one night doing emergency IT stuff. Walking around the office building, most of the lights were off and it's dead silent. As I'm walking by, this guy suddenly rises out of his cubicle like a demon gopher from hell and stares at me with what seemed like unnaturally wide eyes. It turns out he was just working late, and we had scared the shit out of each other. I worked for a taxi company doing quiet night shifts. One time a customer phoned in to say her hire was late and I had to tell her that I didn't have any bookings at her address for then. She swore me out and cut off the call. 10 minutes later she phoned back to say she found out where my office was and was coming down with her boyfriend and her brother. This was about 0230. At 0310 a car pulled up in front of the office and 2 men got out and tried to force their way into the office building. I phoned the police but the people left before the police got there. That was pretty scary. Why did they call for a taxi if they had a car? Used to work at an ice cream factory from 6 p.m. to 6 a.m. Second day on the job, this tenured line leader was trying to unclog compacted cookie dough from the machine. Used her ducking finger. It chopped off the end when it unclogged and started again because no one stopped it. I'm still fresh and new as in helping her out and learning. She jumps off the ladder and yells, "IT cut my goddamn finger off." I froze in fear. She pushed me aside, grabbed all the paper towels and booked it to the ER. We found her fingertip in the ice cream catch a few minutes later and had to trash the entire batch and start fresh, just before my days off and I had to come back in the next day short-handed. Obligatory edit. Yes, we found the bit of her finger, cleaned it and put it on ice. Took it to the ER. She got it reattached. And I get it, short-handed. Ah. I used to work third shift security in a neighborhood near a university. We often encountered some weird stuff, but mostly we just dealt with drunk college brothers and the like. One night it's nearly 4 a.m. so we're ending our shift and heading in when this old homeless looking man stops me and asks me to call an ambulance for him. I ask what's wrong and he's telling me he's having heart palpitations and suicidal ideation. I flag down a coworker who informs our boss and calls for the ambulance. I sit down next to the guy as he's laying on the sidewalk and let him talk to me. At first he's saying what you'd expect from someone who wants to commit suicide, then it gets dark as hell. He starts telling me about a woman he stabbed because he asked her for $20 but she only gave him a few bucks so he murdered her. Okay, pretty creepy, but then it gets worse. He just starts going on about how he's raped people and committed arson and other horrifying stuff, and I'm sitting almost alone with him while my coworker is several buildings down on the phone with dispatch. He starts telling me about how his mother used to have sex with her father and brother and that he saw that? And about how he's a crackhead. When the ambulance arrived he started cussing and yelling, but at least I was free to go at that point. I understand it was probably at least partially the ramblings of a mentally ill crackhead, but it was still unnerving. It's not every day a stranger confesses to you about murder and rapes he's committed. Also, I'm a young woman, so I would occasionally get the super ducking creepy guys who would try to corner me on dark roads or follow me around. So that would get pretty terrifying. I used to be a bouncer at several different locations in the Toronto downtown area. I enjoyed working on the patio when I could despite not being a smoker because talking to people made time go by faster and hey, easier to get phone numbers. There was this one place I worked at that always had crazy shit happen. The patio was also a weak chain link fence with some tarp thrown over it. The club was cheap, so the fence didn't cover the entire area, so I had to be watchful of people trying to sneak in. One night, I felt lazy, so I stood in the opening with my back to the street. I was talking to some people trying to kill the time. I felt some guy stand behind, coming in from the street. This wasn't too unusual. Some people get turned away and when they see me, try to bribe their way through the patio entrance. I was having none of it, so I puffed myself up, determined to ignore him until he gave up on me noticing him. After about 10 minutes of this, I started getting a bit creeped out cause the guy was just standing behind me without saying or doing anything. I turned around to tell him to duck off, but stopped mid-sentence. This guy was a bit taller than me. I'm 6'2", kinda lanky, very well dressed. He was also covered from head to toe in blood. Like completely drenched. I thought he'd been in an accident, so I dropped my tough guy act and started asking him if he was okay, needed an ambulance, etc. He calmly responded, "Nah, he's good. He just wants to find his brothers." I was like, are you sure your brothers are here? He insists that they are here as they told him they'd be in X city, not anywhere near Toronto where the club is located. After his complete obliviousness to what city he's in, the fact that he's soaked in blood, and his intense stare, dude wasn't blinking, I called my boss up. When my boss appeared, I gave a quick rundown of what happened. He talked to the guy very briefly, then told him he'd assist. He went and got some patrolling cops. When the cops appeared, one of them lightly touched the bloody guy on the shoulder. That's when he started screaming incoherently and tried slashing at him with a small knife that had been concealed in his pocket. The cops, my boss and I subdued the guy until he could be cuffed and placed inside a cop car. The guy was screaming loudly and struggling to hulk out of the cuffs, as the cuffs cut deeply into his wrists, the entire time. To this day, I still have to clue what the hell that was about. I worked for 4 years as a chef in a nursing home. I typically left by 8 every night, but I would occasionally stay over and help the third shift janitors clean and lock up the kitchen. I was leaving one night close to 11 or midnight-ish when the front desk lady asked me to run into the tunnel and grab a few items from the locked housing unit. My building was split into 2 side-by-side buildings connected by a tunnel underground that we would transport bodies of the deceased so other residents didn't see them. This prevented panic attacks for our elderly patients. The tunnel had a few storage units down there, so it wasn't uncommon to need to get stock. To get into my end of the tunnel you had to use a locked stairwell or elevator with a passcode. So I get to the tunnel and for some reason all of the lights are out except the red glowing emergency exit signs. Alright, no biggie. I turn the corner from the elevator to head up the tunnel and retrieve the items Margie needed when I see a tall black figure just swaying side to side. I approached it just in time for it to shriek at the top of its lungs, effectively prompting everything in my bowels to make a sudden vacation in my pants. She was illuminated only by the red exit signs in a dingy cement tunnel. She screamed, I screamed, she screamed louder. Ronnie, the poor janitor from further in the tunnel, screamed and repeat. She turned out not to be a demon spawn ready to reap my soul, but a memory patient that woke up in the night and wandered off in a daze. How she ended up in the tunnel I never figured out, but after calming her down I was able to walk her back to her room and get her settled. The ducking attending nurse didn't even know she was missing, and I don't know how long she was down there. I was careful about that tunnel for a long time after that though. When I was a young teenager, I had a commercial cleaning gig with my parents as the night shift guys. You know, the ones who come into your friendly neighborhood Chili's after the other guys close and really clean the place, kitchen, bathrooms and all. The restaurant was located in a fairly busy area of town in a mini strip mall, so we weren't really concerned about security since there was always a patrolling night guard riding around the strip's parking lot to make sure that there was no trouble. Well, this particular night, it was just myself and my mother cleaning one of our nightly buildings by ourselves while my pop and sister were doing the other one across town. Everything was going smoothly until my mom realized she left our new box of Tide. We used it for the kitchen floors, outside in the truck. Me, being unfazed by the aspect of being alone outside at 1 a.m. in the morning, chose to go get it, and right when I was locking the door to the truck and inching my way back inside, I noticed a guy standing across the parking lot just staring at me. He wasn't moving or anything like that, just staring. It was creepy as hell, so I merely walked back inside and made sure that the door was locked before continuing to do my business. When I moved out of the kitchen into the front dining area to begin mopping, that's when I noticed that creeper dude was now standing beneath the front door awning outside, staring in the glass, looking at me. Dude practically screamed homeless wit. His disheveled clothes, long, stringy hair and thick, wild beard, but honestly it was his eyes that really freaked me out. I can only describe them as utterly soulless. Beginning to get a bit freaked out, but not wanting to be rude, I gave him a quick glance before going back to do my work, but before I could really do it, he started slowly and almost rhythmically pounding on the glass with his fists, still staring intently at me. At that point, I was pretty much done with trying to be patient with him and promptly yelled at him to piss off. My mom heard me yelling from the kitchen and came out to see just what all of the commotion was, and I told her while pointing at the man. The moment that I did though, I saw my mom blanch and then slowly begin to back away. She grabbed my wrist and urged me to do the same, but wouldn't let me turn around to see what the hell was up. We reached the back stockroom of the restaurant and stayed there while Mom called the strip security guard to let him know what was up. Later that evening, after the security guard came and checked the place, he said there was no sign of the guy, but there, at the front door of the restaurant, he found a discarded straight razor laying in the middle of the pavement and another in the bushes at the place that he had been pounding on the glass. My mom said that when I had called her over and looked away, he had grinned at her and I both and held up the knife to tap it against the glass. We no longer work nights, but still, whenever we do get the occasional call for a deep clean, I always have my own weapons with me just in case. Probably not what you're hoping for, but whatever. I worked overnight at a pasta plant during my teens. One night my dad showed up out of nowhere. He worked there, he was the quality control manager, and told me we were going home. No explanation or anything at the time. He just said they were shutting down production immediately and there wasn't going to be work for probably a few more days. Turned out some guy ducking killed one of his kids in the plant, probably by accident. It took a long time for the rumors to get back to me, but apparently one of the forklift guys was joyriding around the place, went under one of the overhangs, but had his kid in the thing with him, and that kid was standing up with his head out the top. Apparently he either was decapitated or his neck was broken, but either way he was killed. It was creepy how it happened in the place, and it couldn't have been far from me, but I had no idea. Also really terrible and horrific just thinking about how it could have happened. As a parent now it makes me sick. I work at an industrial copper mine in British Columbia, Canada. The mine water gets filtered through a tailings process in ponds spread out through the woods. We work from 7 p.m. to 7 a.m., and with travel to and from work included, the workday is about 15 hours long. A typical work tour is 5 nights long, and by the end of it you are pretty tired. Driving through the forest at night, you have to get out of your truck when you get to a pump house. On several occasions I can hear the screaming of animals, various birds, coyotes, wild cats, bears, etc., and never really understand the origin of the sound. You can shine a flashlight at the woods, but it's not uncommon to find blinking reflective eyes, so it's almost better not to. You just end up creeping yourself out. One night I was at one of the pump houses in the dark, and I hear bushes rustling just feet from me, around the corner of the pump house door I had just locked. I froze in place both out of fear and uncertainty as to whether I should unlock the pump house or run back to my truck. The rustling got louder, and for some foolish reason I shined my flashlight at the noise and walked towards it. I saw the branches of the bushes explode forward as a giant brown monster popped out. It took a second to realize it was a moose. If you have ever seen a moose in person, you know they are huge. It just ducked off in another direction, but scared the shit out of me in the process. This happened a few months ago. I work at a grocery store overnights and everyone else who should have been there called out for one reason or another. I went out around 2 a.m. to smoke and I saw someone sitting on the bench. I didn't really think of anything of it, figured it was just a drunk who was wandering around the town since there's a few bars down the street. I sat down and started to smoke and look at my phone. The drunk guy screamed at me as I lit a smoke. "Hey buddy, do you mind? My dog doesn't like smoke." I looked around confused as duck and didn't see a dog anywhere. "I think your dog might have ran off somewhere, man. I don't see a dog." He stood up and opened up his jacket and he had a little pug in his jacket. I noticed he had a large kitchen knife sitting stuffed into his inside jacket pocket. He started to pet his dog and baby talked the dog with very slurred words. I put out my smoke and decided I'm not going to die for smoking next to a dog. He started singing Just Give Me a Reason by Pink and walking towards me as I was heading back in. Hurried the duck back inside of the building. Thanks for listening to another episode of Reddit X. Subscribe and activate the notification bell so you won't miss any stories. Feel free to share your own stories below in the comments. Have a good day.